My point with all this, I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is you need to think about the stress levels that our troops are put under. You start out and you go to basic. You know, you're Joe Schmo off the street. Most people don't have a military background. They're going there because, for whatever reason, there's a multitude of them. We won't go into that. But anyhow, you go into the service, and first off, it's like stepping into an alien, planet environment. You don't speak the language. All these other people are yelling and screaming and hollering, and dressed the same. And you're trying to figure out rank structure. You're trying to figure out acronyms. It's like learning a foreign language altogether. So I would use that as stressor one, right? And that's good because, like the stress card BS that they came out with, that's just asinine. What's the mission of the United States Army? To fight and win the nation's war. How are you going to fight and win the nation's war when you're sending troops out of basic and AIT who haven't been put in stressful situations? They haven't been pushed to that limit. They haven't been broken all the way down and built back up. You need that muscle memory, folks. So the next time you hear somebody whining and crying about how hard basic training is, or how hard AIT was, or whatever the case was, and how mean the drill sergeants were, they're not mean. They're real. Especially in today's day and age. Most of them have been there and done that, and they fully understand what needs to happen to ensure that your soldier, your service member, will survive when it hits the proverbial fan. So that's important. It all adds to the overall stress and, like I said, muscle memory. So indoctrination into the military. That's your first, stress level. Let's look at it. We'll use the analogy of the camel and the straw, right? You enter the service, and you brought some kind of, straw load along with you on your back just from your regular everyday life that you had as a civilian before you come in the service. Now, through every step of your military career, you're going to add more straw on a regular basis. So you start out with your civilian, baggage, straw, whatever you want to call it. So you're probably about half full now, but maybe 3/4, depending on what kind of life you had before you came in. You go through basic training. There's yet another stressor, so you add a little bit more straw for that. You go through and I'll use medics as an example because that's what I know. I am a 13 Bravo, I am a 51 Bravo, but those were all my reserve times, as well as 13 Delta and some other. I've got like 5 MOSs total from bouncing around. That's off the point. Anyhow, as a medic, you've added your life straw. You've added your indoctrination straw. You've added the fact, going back before the medic, that you raised your right hand and you took an oath to defend your nation against all enemies, foreign and domestic, at all costs, even if that means sacrificing your life. It's not just words, folks. Those things are things that you have to take to heart and you have to realize, especially in today's day and age. If you join the service, you're probably going somewhere where you're going to get shot at, or you're going to have incoming rounds, or whatever the case may be. It's a hostile world that we live in. That's just the reality of it. So there's yet another stressor before you even bring in the MOS specialties. As a medic, you have to do things. You have to be prepared to, yes, you took your initial oath. I'm willing to give my life for my brothers and sisters, as well as, my country, in defense of all that. As a medic, you have to be prepared to see people at their worst. All that trauma, people screaming and hollering, it's not a nice experience, but it's a necessary one, and we need people like that. So that's why we go and do it. So there's some more straw that you add on there. You have to accept the fact that you may be working on someone that at some point. It's inevitable. It's going to happen, and that's a huge one. For me, that was a straw that broke the camel's back as far as I'm concerned. When I had to work on somebody that I knew who ended up dying, it was just the end-all, be-all for me. My brain officially shut down from there. So you can see my point here. As we go through our careers, we add more straw to the camel's back, and eventually, the backs are only so strong, and depending on the amount of stress that you add to that, it's going to overcome you at some point, and you're going to have to adjust fire and figure out what the hell is going on and how you're going to fix it. So continuing with the stressors, medical and religious personnel, the only two personnel which I was unaware of until my first deployment, but anyhow, it wouldn't have changed the way I did things, and it didn't change the way I did things. But anyhow, medical and religious personnel are the only two personnel who are required, per the Geneva Convention, to stay behind with POWs if you're captured with the wounded. When other folks are getting released, you're going to stay there. As a medic, you have to be prepared to work on your enemy. They've got some good information sometimes, so you really don't have a choice. It's kind of mission essential to save all of them you can until somebody at a higher level is able to interview them and find out what's going on, what they do have or what they don't have. And that can be a hard one to swallow. I know it was for me at first. I didn't understand. I didn't really care. I did my job. I treated all the wounded enemies. My first time down, that was basically all I did. I never treated an American soldier for anything more than minor abrasions. Maybe a piece of dirt got in their eye or whatever the case was, and that's with everything we had going on. Our Iraqi counterparts, however, treated countless of them, from blast injuries to gunshot wounds to just general ailments. It got to the point that when I set up sick call in Marathana, that my Jundis, the soldiers, the Iraqi soldiers, the commandos, were bringing their family members to me for treatment, and that was a heavy load to carry or figure out how I was going to go ahead and do this, how I was going to procure supplies for it and all that. It's just another stressor. Worst part for me, my first time down, was the children. It's 130 degrees in the shade over there, folks. And like I said, the infrastructure it's annihilated. So how do they get power? Well, if they're lucky enough to have a generator, they've got their generator going. It runs non-stop pretty much. When it gets low on fuel, what do? They send out the youngest member that's capable to fuel these generators. So you're talking anywhere from 5 to mid-teens or whatever, depending on the family dynamic and what's going on for them at the time. So they go out and they're young, they're not schooled up on this stuff, whatever the case may be. Like I said, it's 130 in the shade. This machine's been running non-stop, so the children wouldn't shut it down. They'd leave the equipment running and they start dumping fuel in it. Well, in the process of that, you'd get any kind of a spark, whether it was static electricity or the muffler or whatever the case is, and these cans would blow up on these kids. I don't know if you've ever seen a burn victim, but I'm here to tell you it's not a pretty sight, especially when it's a young child screaming and hollering. The majority of the time, their family was so overwhelmed when they came upon them, and distraught, that they'd grab these poor little kids, and generally their burns are all in their arms and face and torso. You're talking inhalation burns, their throats are swelling up. Anybody that's ever worked on a pediatric case fully understands they stabilize, and then they just crash. They're not like people, they're full-grown people, they can't come out and communicate and say, oh, this hurts, the next thing, whatever the case is. But anyhow, the parents would get distraught, or the family would get distraught and not think, and they'd go to drag these kids. Well, in the process of doing that, they slough all the skin off their arms. It's a pretty gnarly and nasty sight. And those things stick with you. We'll discuss this more as we go along. But right now, I'm just trying to drive that nail home so you fully understand the amount of stress that our service members deal with and they go through in defense of our great nation. Whether you think these conflicts are good, bad, or indifferent, that's a moot point. The point is we have an all-volunteer service, and in such, we all raised our right hand. We all volunteered. We weren't voluntold until we got in on what we were doing, but we volunteered to start, and we're all proud of that fact. We all take that to heart. It puts on a different set of lenses, if you will, in the glasses that you wear. When you finally step through that door into the military, your indoctrination's over, and now you're a service member, you're a soldier, and you're ready to go perform your duties, and you want to do just that. So we've been talking a lot about the stress buildup, how things are like building blocks or straw on the camel's back and just keeps getting added on and added on and added on, and it's to be expected. That's the reality of the military and how we run our services. It has to be that way. If you don't, we won't have a successful military at all.